Hi, this is Mrs. Davis. This is AP Computer Science, and we're working on Unit 8, Lesson 8.1, Intro to 2D Arrays. And we're on the second video, and we're getting ready to write a little practice method that accepts a 2D dimensional array of doubles and just checks to see if it is a square table. And so it's going to return true if it is a square table and false otherwise. So for our method header, we're going to say public static, and then what do we have to return? We need to return a Boolean, right? So it returns true or returns false. So that's why it's Boolean, and we're going to call it square table. Doesn't tell us what to call it, but we'll call it square table. And then it has a parameter that is a double array, double 2D array, and we'll call it ARR. And so, how do we know whether it's a square table? And that would mean that the rows would equal the columns, right? The number of rows equals the number of columns. So we can just say if ARR.length, that's the number of rows, equals, because it returns an integer, right? ARR, and how do we get the columns? It would be 0.length. And so I want to return whether this is true or false. So you just return it. So there you go. All right, let's go on to an example that's from your textbook. It's a good example. So we have medals, I guess there's like an Olympics or something, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 countries, and it counts the number of gold medals, silver medals, and bronze medals so far. So we're going to set up an array that will hold this data, okay? And so we're going to have the number of countries is going to be a constant instead of hard coding a 7 in there. And also the number of medals is going to be 3. And you'll see that 3 means this is the rows. So it would be 7 countries, and then gold, silver, bronze, the number of types of medals. So this is the columns. All right, so those are just setting up constants for that. Because you'll see, you could just change these, and you change those two, and you would have a different size, a 2D array. So here comes the setup of the 2D array. It's an integer 2D array called counts, and you need the word new, and then you have a new integer 2D array. And so the number of rows, which would go here in this first bracket, would be countries, which is 7, but it's better to use in this case, they're showing you how good it is to use a final variable, and then you only have to change it one place. And then medals would be the number of columns, which is in this case 3. So you could also declare it by, if you do this, it sets up everything as it sets everything up as 0, 0, 0. So it would be this 2D array, and it would be an integer, so it would be 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 3 of those. So it's just giving that part of the array, each one of these being its own array. So you could set it up where you're putting it in directly. So here's how you could put this was setting up as default values, right? So say we already know what it has, so these match that. So you would set it up into array counts, and then you don't need the new to do it this way. You just need a bracket for the overall. And I like how they did it. Instead of doing it all the way across, they did each row on a row. So these are the columns of each row. So here's your 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are your 7 countries. which by the way has not been stored. It's just the metals. So you need like a parallel to be able to keep track, because you can't put strings in the same 2D array as integers, but you can have a parallel array that uses the same index as the other one, so you'd be all right. But as you can see up here in the picture, we have Canada with one gold and one bronze. So this is Canada 010. And then notice how it's done. Again, you have the outer to say this is going to be a 2D array, and here's the rows. Each one of these is a row, and then inside each row is the data for each column. Okay, so remember that the number of rows is a dot length, and if the name of the array is a, and then a sub 0 dot length would be the number of columns. Some comments here, like a one-dimensional array, you can't change the size of a 2D array once you create it. It's there. To access an individual element, you have to specify the 2 index values, and we did that on the first page practicing. So we're going to store, though, we're going to get out what is counts 3, 1. So if I go counts 3, 1, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, it would be 0. So, and then I would store that in an integer named metal count. So it's just kind of an example. All right, now here's the biggest thing. Biggie, highlight out here. Okay, this is how to access all elements in a 2D array. You need nested loops. You need an outer loop that's for the rows and an inner loop for the columns. So your outer loop will be a for loop, and then inside that, there'll be another for loop for the inner loop. So here's a great example of how you could print out that information, just the metal counts. So here you go. For in I equals 0, I is less than countries. So countries was the number of rows. So here we start at 0 and go to less than the number of rows. And then right inside, we're saying, okay, now in the row for each column, right? We're saying for each column, do this. So for in J, so notice you're in nested, so you have to use a different variable, right? You can't use I again because you're inside. If you were back outside, you could use I again, but you're using I, so this one would have to be J is less than metal, so that would give you how many columns, and that goes up by 1. And so then it says process the J column in the ith row. So it goes through, if you were adding things here, here's how it would be. I'm going to start out like this, and I'm going to start out in doing, this is my for loop for this. That's the outer. And then the inner is going to this one, and this one. So this is the for loop for the inner. So it would go ahead and print out. Now this has a printf so that it will print it in tabular form. So remember how to do that. But it goes ij. So the first one, if we just trace this, and I want to do it not very long, but if I have I and I have j, I is 0 and then j is 0. So 0, 0 gives me, I'm going to print out, so let's see, if we had this array, 1, 0, 1, I'll just do a few, and let's see. Let me try to get a better picture. Let's see if I can do this. Just make something up. 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0. Okay? And so if this is I and this is j. So first I is 0 and it goes through all the j's. So if I'm printing out, and say I was printing down, it would print out 0, 0, right? And then it would go to, I'm still in row I, so it would go 0, 1. Now j's 1 and it would print out 0. And then j would go to 2 and it would print out 0, 2, so it would print out 1. Then I would be changed to 1 and I'm on the second row. So j starts again back at 0. Notice how it starts at 0 each time inside. So then, you know, it would go 0. So then it would print, the next line would be 0. And then it would go 1. And now it's in the second column of the second row. And it would be 1. And then the third column of the second row, 0. And then it would go to 2. So that's how you walk through it. You need you need nested loops to go through a 2D array. And remember, 2D arrays are always on the AP exam. It's one of the free response questions. So you have to just be quite familiar with it, and they're not hard. It just takes a little getting used to. So this shows you, if you didn't use the constants of countries, etc., you could use length. So if we had a counts array, and we had it was a 3 by 4, so 3 rows by 4 columns, then you would say, if you were doing the rows, counts.length, because I'm doing the outer loop, which is just counts. And then when I'm in my inner loop, I have the columns. So this is rows, that counts.length. And then inside each row, I want to go through each column. So that would be the column. And you can use just 0, like you're going to get the length of the first, how many columns are in the first row, and assume that, because you can for this class, that all your 2D arrays every row has the same number of columns. So let's put that down. In this APCSA, every 2D array has the same number of columns for each row. Okay, so now let's keep going. I think we can just look at this last little bit. Let's see, what are we having us do? Okay, so we can sum things up. So that's one of the really good uses. You can see how you could be using for math and banking and everything. But say we wanted to count across how many of each total medals did they get. And so you would have to have a total for the, each row would have a total. So let's see how you would go through this. So you need to compute the sum of ij, where j ranges from 0 to the medals minus 1, or counts.length minus 1, and you need to set I to whatever row. So let's look. Here we go. We set an integer total, and then we go for j equals 0 to j is less than the number of columns. Total is total plus counts ij. So it's just going to keep a total, and it's in the inner loop. Okay, and that would just total across. You would need an outer loop for int I equals 0. I is less than countries, I plus plus, right? And so then you would be able to print across. Now, of course, if you want to print it all, you've got to do the loop where you're printing this, and then at the end you're printing that. So this would be like print out the just ij, right? And then print out the totals at the end. Now, an enhanced for loop, you can also use a 2D, a 2D array can also use an enhanced for loop. So we're just going to look at this example. So we'll put this on the next video.